The Interstellar Defense Academy on Chronax Prime had a reputation that could crush lesser institutions under its own gravitational pull, which coincidentally was exactly 3.2 times what most civilized species considered reasonable. But then again, most civilized species hadn't built the galaxy's premier military training facility on a planet where a casual stroll felt like carrying a refrigerator up Mount Everest. The Academy's gleaming spires stretched toward Chronax's blood-red sky, their graviton-reinforced foundations anchored deep enough to survive the occasional tectonic tantrum that heavy worlds were prone to throwing. It was here that the galaxy's finest military minds came to forge the next generation of elite soldiers, assuming they could survive orientation without their bones turning to powder, which made the arrival of the human exchange student all the more amusing to anyone with a functioning sense of irony. The transport shuttle wheezed to a landing on Docking Bay 7, its anti-grav compensators working overtime to keep from pancaking against the reinforced durasteel platform. Through the viewports, curious alien faces pressed against the glass to catch a glimpse of the biological curiosity that had somehow convinced the Galactic Defense Council to waste a perfectly good scholarship slot. The human emerged from the shuttle with what could generously be described as determination, though the way she immediately stumbled and caught herself against the docking clamps suggested that Chronax Prime was already making its opinion known about her presence. The gravity hit her like a particularly vindictive physics lesson, turning each step into a negotiation with the laws of the universe. "Behold," rumbled Commander Thrak, a 7-foot mountain of crystalline muscle whose homeworld boasted gravity levels that could liquefy most organic matter, "our newest recruit from the legendary Earth." The emphasis he placed on legendary carried roughly the same tone one might use when describing a particularly entertaining fairy tale. The assembled alien cadets, a collection of the galaxy's most physically impressive specimens, regarded the human with the kind of polite interest usually reserved for exotic pets. There was Corvin, whose 6 arms had been sculpted by the crushing embrace of a gas giant's moon. The twins from Gravitas Major, whose idea of light exercise involved juggling neutronium weights, and Zephyr, whose chitinous exoskeleton had evolved on a world where the surface pressure could compact coal into diamond. They were the elite, the genetically blessed, the products of evolutionary arms. Races fought on worlds that treated physics as a suggestion rather than a law. Each had been selected from millions of candidates across their respective species, representatives of military traditions stretching back millennia. And now they were watching a human try not to fall over while standing still. "The training regimen," announced Instructor Krill, his 4 legs planted firmly against the crushing gravity that would have reduced most beings to component atoms, "has been carefully calibrated over centuries to push the absolute limits of biological performance. We will begin each day at 0500 standard with a light 20-kilometer run across the Chronax Highland obstacle course." The human's face went through several interesting color variations that weren't typically found in standard atmospheric spectrum. Following morning conditioning, Krill continued with the cheerful enthusiasm of someone describing a particularly scenic route through hell. "Cadets will proceed to strength training. Today's light warm-up consists of deadlifting twice your body weight in Chronax standard gravity." A few aliens chuckled, the sound resembling boulders having a friendly conversation about demolition. "Combat training begins after the noon meal break, assuming anyone survives breakfast. We'll start with basic hand-to-hand techniques using practice weapons weighing only 50 standard pounds each." The human made a sound that might have been either a cough or her soul leaving her body. "Any question?" Krill's compound eyes gleamed with what passed for amusement among species evolved from armored predators. The human raised a trembling hand. "Is there perhaps a beginner's course? Maybe something designed for, beings with endoskeletons and circulatory systems dependent on atmospheric pressure." The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as concentrated awkwardness. Commander Thrak's crystalline features arranged themselves into what his species considered a smile, an expression that had been known to cause small avalanches on his homeworld. "This is the beginner's course. What you see here represents the most basic elementary training protocols in the galactic standard military curricula." And so began the human's first day at the academy, which proceeded exactly as well as one might expect when dropping a creature evolved for 1G environments into a training program designed by and for beings who considered tectonic activity a form of light entertainment. By the end of the day, the human had managed to complete approximately 3% of the prescribed exercises, had discovered entirely new forms of exhaustion, and had provided the alien cadets with enough entertainment to last several rotations. The medical bay had gained a new frequent visitor, and the Academy's maintenance staff had to reinforce several training devices after they had been accidentally destroyed by what Instructor Krill diplomatically termed gravitational adjustment failure. As the human limped toward her quarters, leaving behind a trail of what appeared to be liquid dignity, the alien cadets exchanged the universal expression shared by predators who had just witnessed something that definitely belonged several levels down on the food chain. Tomorrow, they decided, would be even more amusing. If the first day had been a gentle introduction to the realities of galactic military training, the subsequent weeks proved that the Academy's definition of gentle bore no resemblance to any known interpretation of the word across 47 documented languages. The human's daily routine had evolved into what could charitably be described as systematic biological warfare between her Earth-adapted physiology and Chronex Prime's malicious interpretation of gravitational constant. Each morning brought fresh opportunities to discover new and creative ways for the universe to demonstrate its complete indifference to her continued structural integrity. Week 2 introduced the Combat Simulation Program, a technological marvel that somehow managed to make regular training look like a relaxing spa day. The holographic environments could replicate any battlefield condition across known space, from the methane swamps of Titan 7 to the crystalline death mazes of the Shattered Worlds. The program's AI had been programmed by beings who considered psychological torture a form of light entertainment. Today's scenario, announced Instructor Krill with the enthusiasm of someone about to witness a particularly spectacular traffic accident, simulates urban warfare in a standard 2. Cadets will navigate through hostile territory while carrying full combat loads and engaging enemy targets with standard-issue plasma rifles. The alien cadets accepted their weapons with casual ease, 60-pound rifles that hummed with enough contained energy to vaporize small buildings. They shouldered the additional 40 pounds of tactical gear as if it were costume jewelry. The human accepted her equipment and immediately reconsidered several life choices, along with the basic structural engineering of her spine. What followed could only be described as educational, assuming one's definition of education included watching someone discover the exact limits of biological determination when confronted with hostile physics. While the alien cadets moved through the simulation with fluid grace, their massive frames adapted to crushing gravitational fields, the human developed what could generously be termed creative alternative approaches. Where others relied on brute strength to kick down doors, she discovered that plasma rifles, when properly recalibrated, could also function as somewhat indiscriminate door removal devices. When direct assault proved inadvisable, which was constantly, she exhibited a disturbing talent for what the instructors diplomatically labeled asymmetric problem-solving. "Cadet," rumbled Commander Thrak after reviewing her performance on the third week's urban warfare simulation, "your tactical approach appears to prioritize unorthodox solutions." The human, currently held upright primarily through willpower and possibly some form of localized gravitational anomaly, managed a response that might have been agreement or simply the sound of her respiratory system filing a formal complaint. "Explain your rationale for using the plasma rifle's overcharge function to collapse that building instead of engaging the enemy directly." "Well, sir," she wheezed, "the enemy was in the building. Now they're not. Mission accomplished." The silence that followed suggested that the Academy's instructional staff was collectively reconsidering their understanding of tactical doctrine. But it was during weapons training that the human's apparent inadequacy reached truly impressive. The standard-issue combat knife weighed 12 pounds and had been forged from materials that could cut through starship armor. In the hands of properly evolved heavy world species, it was a precision instrument. In human hands, it became a fascinating study in applied leverage and the fundamental relationship between mass and inertia. Corvin, demonstrating proper technique with his 6 arms, could make the blade dance through complex combat forms that resembled lethal calligraphy. The twins from Gravitas Major treated their knives as extensions of their own bodies, moving with the fluid precision of beings whose ancestors had hunted prey across worlds where atmospheric pressure could crush unprotected organisms. The human held her knife like it was actively attempting to file a restraining order against her. "The key," explained Instructor Vex, a being whose homeworld featured atmospheric conditions that most species would classify as immediate death, "is to work with the weapon's natural balance and momentum." Let the blade's weight guide your strike. This advice proved remarkably unhelpful when the weapon in question weighed more than most Earth mammals and possessed the aerodynamic properties of a small anvil. Yet somehow, through methods that defied both conventional wisdom and several laws of physics, the human began adapting. Her techniques bore no resemblance to anything taught in the Academy's 1,000-year curriculum, but they achieved results that left the instructional staff scratching various configurations of heads and appendages. Where proper form demanded power and precision, she substituted creativity and what could only be described as weaponized desperation. Her combat style resembled less the disciplined martial arts of galactic military tradition, and more like someone had taught physics to panic and given it access to military hardware. Unorthodox became Instructor Krill's favorite word when describing her progress, though he pronounced it with the tone typically reserved for discussing particularly virulent forms of cosmic radiation. The other cadets had progressed from finding her amusing to something approaching genuine curiosity. Beings who had spent their lives in crushing gravitational fields, who had been forged by evolutionary pressures that would liquefy most organic matter, were beginning to notice something peculiar about their supposedly inferior classmate. She never stopped trying. It defied logic. Any reasonable creature faced with systematic physical impossibility would have either adapted through biological augmentation or admitted defeat and found a nice career in gravitational agriculture. But the human continued showing up each day, continued accepting equipment that threatened her structural integrity, and continued finding ways to complete training exercises through methods that made senior instructors question their understanding of tactical possibility. By the end of the 6th week, she had somehow managed to pass every required simulation, though her methods had necessitated complete rewrites of several training protocols, and had caused 3 different AI systems to file formal complaints about unreasonable operational parameters. And then came the announcement that would change everything. "Next week," proclaimed Commander Thrak, his crystalline features arranging themselves into what his species considered anticipation, "we begin heavy weapons certification. Cadets will demonstrate proficiency with the Academy's most challenging equipment." He paused, allowing the significance to settle across the assembled students like a particularly ominous weather system, including the MX-7 Graviton battle tank. The alien cadets exchanged glances of excited nervousness. Even for beings evolved on heavy worlds, the Graviton battle tank represented the absolute pinnacle of military engineering challenge. The human, meanwhile, was developing what appeared to be an entirely new relationship with the concept of existential dread. The MX-7 Graviton battle tank, squatted in the center of the Academy's primary training facility, like a metallic monument to the universe's casual indifference toward the survival of lesser species. 45 tons of crystalline armor plating, fusion-powered locomotion system, and enough firepower to sterilize small moons. It represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic military engineering, assuming one's definition of pinnacle included designed by beings who considered structural integrity a polite suggestion. The tank's graviton-enhanced armor could deflect direct hits from stellar-class weapons, while its propulsion systems generated enough localized gravitational distortion to make nearby physics professors weep openly. It was in every measurable sense a masterpiece of destructive capability, wrapped in protective systems that could survive direct impact with small asteroids. It was also, according to the Academy's training protocols, something that graduating cadets should be able to lift and throw. "Heavy weapons certification," announced Commander Thrak, his crystalline form reflecting the morning light in patterns that suggested barely contained anticipation, "represents the ultimate test of military preparedness. Cadets must demonstrate complete mastery over the tools of galactic warfare." The assembled students, products of evolutionary arms races, fought across worlds where atmospheric pressure could compress carbon into industrial diamonds, regarded the tank with the respectful attention due to a piece of equipment that could accidentally erase them from existence. "The exercise is straightforward," continued Instructor Krill, employing the Academy's traditional definition of straightforward, which bore no relationship to any conventional understanding of the term. "Each cadet will lift the MX-7 battle tank to shoulder height and propel it across the marked distance of 50 meters. Even the alien cadets, beings whose casual weekend activities included juggling neutronium and arm wrestling gravitational anomalies, regarded this announcement with expressions that suggested they were reconsidering their career choices. We begin with Cadet Corv. The six-armed giant from Titan's Edge approached the tank with the careful respect of someone who understood exactly how many different ways 45 tons of military hardware could redistribute his component atoms across the training facility. His homeworld's crushing gravity had forged his species into living sculptures of biological engineering. Each muscle fiber evolved to function in conditions that would liquefy most organic matter. Corvin positioned his 6 arms around the tank's chassis, his massive frame bracing against Cronax Prime's malicious gravitational field. The training facility's observers held their collective breath, or equivalent respiratory functions, as he engaged muscles that had been carved by evolutionary pressures that treated structural failure as a form of natural selection. The tank shifted, rose 6 inches. 12. Corvin's crystalline-enhanced skeleton creaked under the strain as he lifted 45 tons of military-grade death machinery to approximately chest height, held it for the required 3 seconds, then hurled it across the training field in an arc that briefly achieved what could generously be termed ballistic trajectory. The impact crater measured roughly 30 meters in diameter and required immediate attention from the facility's geological stability team. Applause echoed through the training facility, the sound of beings acknowledging that they had just witnessed the upper limits of biologically possible achievement. The twins from Gravitas Major managed similar feats, their synchronized lifting technique distributing the tank's mass across their combined 12-limb configuration. Their throw achieved slightly better distance, but left a crater that necessitated emergency consultation with the Academy's structural engineering department. Zephyr, whose chitinous exoskeleton had been pressure-forged on a world where surface conditions could compact matter into exotic phases, lifted the tank with impressive technique but discovered that her throwing mechanics had been somewhat compromised by the fact that her species had evolved primarily for defense, rather than artillery application. Each cadet's attempt was recorded, measured, and evaluated according to standards that had been calibrated over centuries to represent the absolute pinnacle of military physical achievement. The tank absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lesser vehicles, its graviton-reinforced construction designed to survive exactly this sort of systematic abuse from beings whose idea of gentle handling could accidentally liquefy conventional materials. And then came the human's turn. She approached the MX-7 Graviton battle tank with the expression of someone who had already accepted that the next few minutes would redefine her relationship with both gravity and mortality. The alien cadets watched with polite interest, the kind typically reserved for observing exotic creatures, attempt behaviors well beyond their evolutionary parameter. "Take your time, cadet," offered Commander Threk, his tone carrying the gentle encouragement, usually directed toward small children, attempting to lift objects roughly equivalent to their own body mass multiplied by several thousand. The human circled the tank, studying its configuration, with the focused attention of someone calculating the exact number of ways the immediate future could go catastrophically wrong. Her Earth-evolved physiology, already operating at the absolute limits of structural possibility under Cronax Prime's crushing gravitational embrace, faced the prospect of manipulating equipment that outweighed her by several orders of magnitude. She positioned herself at the tank's center of mass, or what she apparently believed to be its center of mass, and placed her hands against the crystalline armor plating. The contrast was almost comical. 45 tons of military engineering that could survive direct stellar bombardment, and a being whose evolutionary ancestors had considered running away from large predators, a perfectly reasonable survival strategy. The training facility fell silent. Even the atmospheric recycling system seemed to pause in anticipation. The human took a breath, braced her feet against the reinforced deck plating, and lifted. What happened next would require several years of intensive study by the Academy's physics department, 3 different committees on gravitational anomalies, and a complete revision of the galactic standard military training curriculum. The MX-7 Graviton battle tank rose from the training facility floor, as if Cronax Prime's crushing gravitational field had suddenly decided to take a brief vacation. Not the struggling, muscle-straining lift demonstrated by the alien cadets, beings whose evolutionary history included casual interaction with crushing gravitational forces, but a smooth fluid motion that suggested the 45-ton war machine
had suddenly achieved a personal relationship with weightlessness. The human lifted the tank above her head with the casual ease of someone handling a piece of moderately oversized luggage. The silence that followed possessed the quality of a philosophical revelation occurring to an entire species simultaneously. Then she threw. The MX-7 Graviton battle tank achieved what could only be described as legitimate flight, not the ballistic arc managed by the alien cadets, but actual sustained trajectory that briefly caused several observers to question their understanding of fundamental physics. The tank sailed across the training facility, cleared the 50-meter requirement with what appeared to be casual indifference, and continued traveling until it impacted the far wall with sufficient force to cause minor seismic activity. The crater it created upon landing measured roughly 80 meters in diameter, and penetrated deep enough to concern the Academy's geological survey team about potential impacts on the planet's structural integrity. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the gentle patter of debris settling back to the training facility floor, and what might have been the collective recalibration of every assumption the assembled aliens had ever made about human beings. The human, meanwhile, stood in the center of the training facility, brushing dust from her hands and looking mildly surprised that the exercise had gone so smoothly. "Was that adequate?" she asked, apparently unaware that she had just redefined the Academy's understanding of what constituted physically possible. The silence that followed the human's casual inquiry stretched across several geological epochs, during which the assembled aliens experienced what could only be described as a collective philosophical crisis regarding the fundamental nature of reality, gravitational physics, and their previous assumptions about species classification system. Commander Thrak's crystalline features cycled through approximately 17 different configurations, each representing a distinct stage of intellectual processing that his species typically reserved for contemplating the heat death of the universe. His compound visual sensors performed rapid recalibration sequences as if hoping that different wavelength analysis might reveal that the previous 60 seconds had been an elaborate hallucination, brought on by excessive exposure to gravitational anomalies. "Adequate," he repeated, the word emerging from his vocal apparatus, with the tone of someone discovering that their fundamental understanding of mathematics had been based on a clerical error. Instructor Krill's 4 legs performed small adjustment movements against the training facility floor, a nervous habit his species had developed during evolutionary periods, when predators could accidentally step on them and cause extinction-level events. His compound eyes reviewed the crater measurements displayed on his tactical readout, cross-referenced them with standard gravitational calculations, and arrived at conclusions that his higher brain functions were politely refusing to accept. The alien cadets, meanwhile, had progressed through the traditional stages of witnessing the impossible: denial, confusion, existential dread, and what appeared to be the early symptoms of species-wide imposter syndrome. Corvin's 6 arms hung limp at his sides, his massive frame suddenly feeling inadequate, despite being the product of evolutionary pressures that had forged his ancestors into living monuments to biological engineering. The twins from Gravitas Major were engaged in rapid chittering conversation in their native language, a discussion that appeared to center around recalibrating their entire understanding of physical capability hierarchy. Zephyr's chitinous exoskeleton had assumed what her species considered a defensive posture, though whether she was protecting herself from the human, or from the implications of what had just occurred, remained unclear. "Perhaps," suggested the human, apparently interpreting the continued silence as constructive feedback, "I should demonstrate the technique again, in case anyone missed the specifics." This offer was met with what could generously be described as universal. "That will not be necessary," Commander Thrak managed, his vocal systems finally recovering from their temporary philosophical breakdown. "Your performance has been comprehensively documented." The Academy's recording systems had captured every moment of the tank throwing exhibition from 47 different angles, including spectral analysis, gravitational field measurements, stress calculations that were currently causing the facility's AI systems to file formal requests for computational assistance from higher-order mathematical constructs. Within 6 standard hours, emergency communiques were racing across the galactic communication network at faster-than-light velocities, carrying urgent messages that would fundamentally alter the Galactic Defense Council's strategic planning assumption. The first communication reached Earth's diplomatic mission approximately 18 minutes after the training exercise concluded. Ambassador Chen, no relation to any Academy cadets, purely coincidental nomenclature, found herself reviewing a priority transmission that appeared to have been composed by beings experiencing various stages of barely controlled panic. Urgent request immediate clarification of human species physical parameters. Previous assessments may require comprehensive revision. Standard gravitational assumptions, potentially catastrophically incorrect. The second communication, dispatched to the Galactic Military Command, included detailed recordings and mathematical analysis that caused 3 different artificial intelligence systems to request emergency maintenance due to computational overflow errors. Recommendation: immediate revision of species threat assessment protocols. Human military potential may exceed previous calculations by several orders of magnitude. The third communication, sent directly to the Galactic Defense Council's Strategic Planning Division, was considerably more succinct. We need more humans, immediately. Back at the Academy, the human had been escorted to what the administration diplomatically termed specialized quarters, comfortable suite that happened to feature graviton-reinforced containment systems and emergency response protocols typically reserved for housing beings capable of accidentally causing geological instability. She remained cheerfully unaware that her casual demonstration had triggered the largest reassessment of galactic military doctrine since the discovery of faster-than-light travel. The alien cadets, meanwhile, were discovering entirely new forms of motion. The prospect of competing alongside, or potentially against, beings who could treat 45-ton war machines as recreational equipment had provided remarkable clarity regarding their future training priorities. Corvin requested immediate access to additional gravitational conditioning equipment. The twins from Gravitas Major submitted formal applications for advanced strength enhancement program. Zephyr inquired about defensive tactics courses, specifically designed for scenarios involving gravitationally advantaged opponents. The Academy's instructional staff found themselves facing the unprecedented challenge of redesigning training protocols to accommodate species whose physical capabilities existed on completely different scales of measurement. Equipment that had been calibrated for beings evolved on heavy worlds suddenly seemed inadequate for preparing soldiers who might serve alongside creatures capable of using battle tanks as improvised projectiles. Commander Thrak spent several days reviewing the Academy's foundational assumptions about military training, gravitational adaptation, and the basic relationship between planetary surface conditions and species development. His conclusions necessitated emergency consultations with the galaxy's leading experts on comparative evolutionary biology and gravitational physics. The human, oblivious to the institutional chaos her performance had generated, continued attending classes with the same determined persistence she had demonstrated throughout her training. She still struggled with the Academy's crushing gravitational conditions, still required creative solutions to overcome her apparent physical disadvantages, and still approached each challenge with the cheerful persistence of someone who had never learned that certain things were supposed to be impossible. The other cadets now watched her with expressions that combined respectful terror with professional admiration, the look typically reserved for observing natural disasters that had achieved sentience and enrolled in military academy.
3 weeks after the tank-throwing incident, the Academy received official notification that their human exchange program had been expanded to include 50 additional Earth-born cadets, along with emergency funding for facility reinforcement, equipment upgrades, and hazard insurance premiums that reflected their new understanding of operational risk factors. The human, reviewing her updated class schedule, noticed that several courses had been renamed. Basic heavy weapons training had become advanced projectile physics. Standard combat conditioning was now listed as adaptive gravitational warfare strategies. And elementary strength assessment had been completely removed from the curriculum and replaced with something called theoretical limits of biological capability. She assumed this was just normal academic evolution and didn't give it much thought. After all, she was finally starting to feel like she belonged at the Academy. Sure, the gravity was still crushing, the training remained impossibly demanding, and her fellow cadets treated her with what appeared to be religious reverence mixed with healthy survival instinct. But she was making progress, and if the instructors occasionally looked at her like she was a walking violation of several fundamental laws of physics, well, that was probably just normal adjustment to having humans in the program. The galaxy, meanwhile, was rapidly discovering that sometimes the most dangerous assumptions are the ones that seem perfectly reasonable right up until a member of a low-gravity species casually launches a 45-ton war machine into orbital trajectory and asks if anyone wants to see her do it again.